Welcome to the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. I'm Kevin C. Neese.
And I'm Mike Poteet, and you're listening to episode 39, the 55-year mission. We're going to start off, as always, with some Star Trek news.
And then we're going to get into your answers to last week's audience question, which we flipped around and asked to you. Plus, we'll be talking about Star Trek Day, which is the day this episode drops.
And then we'll take a look at Star Trek Lower Decks Season 2, Episode 4, Mugato Gumato.
And then we'll get into our audience question for this week, right after our main topic, the 55-year mission. We're going to be looking at Star Trek's various pilots and premiere episodes for that original series, which started 55 years ago. Today, Ensign, engage.
Make it so.
I don't
Steady.
know. Huh?
Steady as she goes.
Steady she goes. I don't normally do that, but I just sort of drew on my inner Will Wheaton for that one.
Go
guess,
for
you know?
it. Well, we all have an inner Will Wheaton. Most Star
do.
Trek fans
We
have
do.
an inner Wesley somewhere. Even the Wesley haters,
Right.
which
agree.
I am not one of.
No, nor am I. In fact, and the reference, though, for those who don't know, is to the Ready Room, which he hosts now, which is the behind-the-scenes show for Star Trek. And whenever he's showing, getting into clips or whatever it is, he says, "Control Room, engage." And so that was me. Yeah.
Oh, see, I
go.
need to be reduced 2 steps in rank. I have not watched The Ready Room
The Ready Room is so
for
good.
any of the series yet.
Particularly the Ready Room for last season's Discovery is so good.
I will
love
have
it
to
so
make
much.
a point to do that.
Will is amazing. There was a host before him, and then there was another show before that called After Treks, which you can't even find on Paramount Plus anymore. But,
They've buried it.
They've buried it. Yeah, it was
The
good. I
lost
liked
episodes.
it. Yeah, but Will's the best. He's awesome.
He is fun. When he hosted First Contact Day back
Yes.
in April, I really enjoyed seeing him again.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's great. Well, hi. It's nice to see you.
Well, it's good to quote unquote see you again too. Yeah. How have you been?
Okay, it's been a week. It's been good. We have a lot of stuff to get to today.
We do. We've
This
got
is
an
exciting.
action-packed episode
Yeah.
of the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast.
Yeah, we have. I guess I'll let you lead off with the Star Trek news.
Well, I think it was the day after we recorded our last episode, Paramount released the opening credit sequence to the upcoming animated series Star Trek Prodigy.
Ta-da!
And I tell you, I watched that thing and I am so psyched. I mean, I was looking forward to Prodigy, but I wasn't counting the days or anything.
Right.
But seeing seeing this brand new ship, the Protostar, which is a very cool looking ship, and hearing new music, but it's very much in the Star Trek grand orchestral opening kind of music vein. And it ends, of course, with the Alexander Courage fanfare from the original series, or not the fanfare, but those few introductory notes.
Right.
It gave me those Star Trek shivers. So I enjoyed it, and I was glad they released that ahead of time to whet our appetite. What'd you think? You had a chance to watch it?
I loved it. I mean, Tim knows this about me. I avoid spoilers at all costs, and I tend to not watch trailers. In fact, when I was watching this week's Lower Decks episode, the longer teaser for Picard season 2 started, and I was like, "Oh crumbs!"
There's a longer teaser.
Yeah,
Oh, I
yeah.
gotta go check
so
that out.
I took out my earbuds and didn't look, But yeah, no, the Prodigy opening titles, I had to see that, and I loved it. I mean, loved it. I was kind of like cautiously optimistic for Prodigy, but just from the opening titles, I am now like so excited. It was beautiful.
Yes, that's exactly the word, and that's fitting since of all the series to this point, I think Voyager has the most beautiful title sequence, and this, of course, being a show that has connections via the Janeway hologram to Voyager, I think it's very fitting that they would craft an opening title as gorgeous as that one is.
Well, it is. I don't know if I agree with you that on Voyager being the most beautiful, but
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, of course, DS9 is my favorite theme, television theme.
But
for
taken
Star
as
Trek.
a whole, visuals and audio. I have to
I
say,
love-
even when they bring in the extra stuff in season 4 of DS9, the
Yeah.
opening sequence, it's kind of slow. It's
It
kind of
is.
slow. Not
It
much
is.
to
I'll
look
give you
at.
that.
Gorgeous
I'll give you
music.
that.
Gorgeous music, but not much to look at.
I'll give you that, but I'm just saying musically though, Deep Space Nine's theme is my favorite of the TV themes.
Fair enough.
And then I really love the openings for Discovery and Picard. They rock my world. So I would have a hard time picking a favorite. Actually, I would say. Because
Voyager. or to save time, Voy.
Yeah, that does it saves so much time. Well, you're very good. We're not in the lower decks yet, but yeah, no, I enjoyed it so much. It was beautiful. It was so beautiful. I'm hoping I get to watch this series with my son.
Yeah,
I really do.
Yeah,
I think it's going to be good, age appropriate, and all that for him. Because as much as I think the style of humor on Lower Decks he would love, the content in Lower Decks he would not.
It drifts into the raunchy or the mildly raunchy a few times. Yeah.
Well, we'll talk about that as we discuss this week's episode.
Yes.
Oh dear. So yeah, we're excited about Prodigy solely because of the title. Actually, you've seen the trailer.
I have seen the trailer, and what little of the plot is in it, and what I know from network synopses, it sounds like it's going to be. I think it's a great idea to focus on characters who aren't already part of the. What did David call it? Star Trek as a place. They're not in that place yet. I mean, they are. They just don't know it yet, I guess.
Right.
So it'll be interesting and I think especially for viewers, younger viewers, but also older viewers watching with them who aren't into Star Trek, it'll be an entry into that Trekkie place in a very natural, kind of organic way, along with the characters themselves.
That's
so
cool.
I think that's a very smart way to start off a new Star Trek series.
That's exciting. I'm looking forward to it. Well, the other series, of course, that's one of the other series. It's on its way, as we mentioned.
An embarrassment of riches.
It is an embarrassment. Gosh, is Picard season 2, and the piece of news that we have for Picard season 2 is that the Borg Queen is returning.
The Borg Queen is returning.
Yeah.
Do you remember when we talked about the trailer, the teaser trailer on First Contact Day that they released, and they focused it on that Queen card? I thought they were doing it because of the Borg Queen, but then, oh no, it's Q coming back.
But then it
we're
is
gonna have
the
them
Borg
both.
Queen, too. Yes.
We're going to have them both, Q and the Borg Queen.
Oh, I had forgotten that. I'm so glad you remembered that, because that's absolutely right. Wow. And it's weird because it's this is the third actor to play the Borg Queen, Annie Wershing. And she was on the 2002 Enterprise episode Oasis.
So she's a Trek alum.
That, I believe, was the generational ship with Rene Auberjonois was in that episode, and they had the whole group of people, family, town, whatever, living on the ship, and I don't remember.
I will take your word for it. Enterprise is not my forte.
Well, I mean, I've seen the series once. I've seen some of the episodes a couple of times, and I do remember this episode. I've seen it a couple of times, and it's really good, of course, because Renee's in it. But I believe that's the episode.
Has she had higher profile roles in other properties that we might have?
Well, yeah.
What might I know her from?
Let me consult.
That's what really matters.
As Tim would say in the old days, my alpha male memory, which that's what he would say when he was consulting Memory Alpha, to sort of in code say, I'm consulting Memory Alpha, but I'm pretending to take credit for it, which I thought was wonderfully undercutting. 24, The Vampire Diaries, Castle, Timeless, The Rookie, Marvel's Runaways, and Bosch. So...
Cannot say I've seen any of those, but I've seen a few seasons of 24.
I do recognize her when they showed the image from the Enterprise episode. I do recognize her. I was like, oh yeah, that person. I remember.
Cool.
So yeah, it's going to be exciting to see what she does with that role and how the Borg Queen enters into Star Trek season 2. I almost don't want to know this kind of stuff. I kind of wish this had been a surprise, but I couldn't miss it.
Well, maybe they're releasing this because there are other bigger surprises that they're. Everybody's so attracted by, Q's back, the Borg Queen's back.
Right.
Maybe they've got a William Shatner cameo in the can already, Who knows?
Let's hope not. I don't
something
know. Maybe
along those lines.
I don't know. Something like that. Right. Yeah, actually, and that is another little tidbit that season 2 has wrapped, and season 3 is in production right now. So, yeah, so that's exciting.
Yeah, so things are popping.
Things are moving along. Things are moving along. So, speaking of moving along, we got to get the show moving along, and we need to address our audience question from last week. If you didn't listen last week, first of all, why? I mean, come on, don't you have anything? I mean, you don't have anything else to do. You should be listening to our show. But we we did a very cheeky thing, and we turned the audience question around on the audience, and we gave you folks at home the opportunity, because we'd talked about the 800 episode of Star Trek, and we each selected our 8 favorite episodes and then brought them to the table and talked about them and all that. But we also brought it, our audience question was turned out to the audience to submit their own episode lists. And one person who submits their episode list actually confirms for us, says for us, I think they're probably right. In This Side of Paradise, Kirk was taunting Spock with being a half-breed. I would like to, I'd like to look at that, but I'm sure this person knows. But anyway, they submitted a list of favorite episodes, and they did 1 episode per series.
Oh, okay.
So it's the original series, Errand of Mercy.
Oh, good choice.
That's a good one. The animated series, Counterclock Incident.
Another good one, yep.
Very good. That's one of those ones that's in the upper echelon of the animated series and has a real impact on Star Trek overall. Kind of like Yesteryear does, because it establishes Robert and Sarah April and all that stuff.
Right.
Really, really cool. So TNG, and this is a really great one that we all overlooked, Sarek.
Oh, of course. That is a beautiful episode. Yeah.
Gorgeous episode. I love that Mark Leonard returned to play Sarek. That's beautiful. And then Deep Space Nine, another great one, The Visitor.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So with Tony Todd playing an elder Jake Sisko.
Yeah.
And his performance is just magical. It's they don't look a lot alike, Sirach Lofton and Tony Todd. But Tony is such a great actor and gives such a beautiful performance that I don't care.
And he's the same actor who played Captain Claw in Star Trek V, right? Which is hard to believe.
I think so, but he did play Worf's brother Kern.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. I knew he played a Klingon at some point. Yeah, he played Kern.
And so good.
Yeah.
And he's done some animated voice work too. Of course, he has that great resonant voice and
beautiful voice.
He's wonderful. I just big Tony Todd fan. Then Voyager Resolutions, and it took me a minute to remember which episode this was, but this is actually one of my favorites of the series, which is when Chakotay and Janeway are on that planet, and the Voyager has to leave them there. And they're in a kind of a temporal pocket, and they live out a whole life together on this planet before Voyager comes back and rescues them, and they get young again and whatever. Yeah, do you remember this? Have you seen
I
this?
don't remember it. I'm sorry to say, but it sounds good.
You were too caught up in the opening title sequence when you watched Voyager. That's the thing.
That's right. I just kept humming that that sweet Jerry Goldsmith theme. Yep.
That's right. It is beautiful. It is beautiful. But so the Resolutions, that's one of my favorites from Voyager as well, so I like that a lot. The Enterprise episode that they selected was The Observer Effect. This is when the Enterprise crew encounters the Organians. They inhabit Hoshi, and it's a very good episode as well, because it ties Enterprise to the original series very closely and carries on the sort of narrative of the Organians. So for Discovery, this person has listed Forget Me Not, which is another really great one. The one that probably the part that we both most connect with. Well, no, I wouldn't necessarily say that. But one of the things that is most memorable is when Saru has the dinner party for the crew.
Oh yeah,
and it kind of breaks apart and everything. It's so beautiful, but then so tragic, and it's a gorgeous episode. And it's also when Adira goes to connect with the Trill and all that.
Yeah,
stuff.
that
It's a beautiful
why that episode didn't get a Hugo Award last year is beyond.
Oh yeah,
yeah, it's beautiful.
It's really great, and I think that was what I mean. I already loved Blue Del Barrio, but watching that episode, I was just like, "You're amazing."
Yes, yes, they are.
Did so well. The textures and their performance are just gorgeous in that episode.
Yeah.
And I wish they had more opportunities to do stuff like that. But hopefully they will next season. Okay, and then Picard Nepenthe, which David and I both mentioned. And yes, that's the best episode of the first season. And Short Trek's Children of Mars.
Oh, I'm impressed they even picked a Short Trek's favorite.
I know. This is a thing I'm thinking about. You know, we were talking about how many episodes last week.
Yep.
But the other question is how many series, because a lot of people forget the animated series. But we generally are saying that Strange New Worlds is going to be the 10th series. But if we're counting 800 episodes, including Short Treks,
yeah,
that means Short Treks is a Star Trek series. That makes Strange New Worlds series number 11.
Well, you could argue that. Yeah, you could also argue that each Short Trek is a part of whatever series it connects with.
That's true. That's true.
I don't know. I don't have I'm not going to get all hot and bothered about one reverting to the other. But those are great. Those are great choices. I'm glad they chose Counterclock Incident because one of my favorite Star Trek novels from back in the day, back in the Pocketbook's glory days, was I believe it's called Final Frontier. It's by
Diane Carey.
Yes, and her husband. Yeah, they co-wrote that one. It's about Robert April and George Kirk on the brand new Starship Enterprise, still unnamed, unchristened, and their first mission out on the Romulan frontier. And it's a good, as I recall, it's an excellent book. So
yeah, that one and Best Destiny kind of live in that space.
Yeah, they make a nice duology.
yes, they do. So I encourage people to check those books out because classic stuff. Awesome. So thank you for sending that in. Again, as usual, we're always happy to hear your feedback, and we've got a good audience question this week, but we're going to go ahead and we've gotten more responses, but we'll save that for next time. Keep sending them in if you want to. We'd love to get more.
There's no deadline.
yeah. But we'll save our other some of our other responses for next time, and because we could spend all day. But I will say there is also one other submission that I got, which was from my son. I was telling him about the episode that we had talked that Star Trek had reached 800 episodes, and we'd each picked our 8 favorite. And the first word out of his mouth was Tribbles. I was like, oh man, none of us picked The Trouble with Tribbles or Trials and Tribulations.
That's true.
That's his absolute favorite Star Trek episode. And I was just like, oh man, sir, you're right.
Yeah, that's a very respectable choice. Absolutely,
respectable choice, definitely. So there you go. So for my son, Tribbles.
Tribbles.
That's good. All right, so today is Star Trek Day. If you're listening to us on Drop Day, we are dropping on Star Trek Day. We don't know what's happening on Star Trek Day. We're just kind of joining in the festivities by doing this episode and having this episode for you to listen to while you are hopefully getting to watch and listen to a lot of other cool Star Trek content. But I thought it would be cool for Mike and I to talk about what we'd like to see from Star Trek Day. And, maybe next week we can talk about whether or not
our
wishes
wish.
came true. Yeah,
we'll make our Star Trek Day wishes.
Yeah.
Well, I'm wishing. I think I said this last week. I'm really wishing for a Strange New Worlds trailer, a substantial trailer, like not a teaser trailer. Those are cool and all, but they've had the whole. They've wrapped the whole series. It's not like Picard was still in production when First Contact Day happened. They've wrapped. So I want to see a substantial 90-second or longer, please, trailer for Star Trek Strange New Worlds. And let's
Okay.
not have it traffic too heavily in the tropes. We can have the Alexander Courage notes, okay, but let's see some strange new things that we haven't seen before in a Star Trek trailer. So,
Well, and
that's my big wish.
That's a good wish for the series, too.
Yeah.
I think
if we're really going to be strange and new, do it.
That's right. I agree with you. That's interesting because we do want that classic Trek feel out of this series, but we also want strange and new. And
The classic feel, and like you said,
Yes.
you brought up last week how the classic series was originally intended as an anthology,
Right.
And it didn't really do that for too long. But that first season, when it did, that's the Star Trekiest Star Trek, in my book. So
That's great. Yeah. Well, that's a good observation. I hadn't thought about that yet, so I think that's good. That's great. Anything else that you're looking forward to, or is that pretty much your wish list?
I'm looking forward to Isa Briones singing "Blue Sky," as I mentioned last week, and I'm sure the panels. I don't mean to disparage anything else. The panels will be great and all, but I want give me a pure shot of Star Trek joy with a new trailer, and I'll be happy.
That's good. That's good.
How
Well,
about you?
I would say, I was actually saying this to a friend of mine earlier today. My wish list, I think, consists entirely of premiere dates. Like, I just want
You
to
are
know.
so fixated on the premiere
I
dates,
am.
man. Podcasting has ruined your ability just to go with the flow.
Just nerd. Oh, podcasting, writing a book, being a speaker, all that stuff. Yes, like I like my chapter in the book on Star Trek 4 is because I was like, you know what? I'm tired of watching Star Trek and only taking notes. I'm just going to watch Star Trek and enjoy it. And I
Right.
watched Star Trek 2 and I loved it. And then I watched Star Trek 3 and I took maybe a few notes. And then I got to Star Trek 4 and I was just like, I'm just going to have fun and finish out the trilogy. And I don't care because there's nothing in this one. And then it was like, oh, Spock is Jesus in this movie too. I got to take notes.
They did it again.
So yeah, it's constantly like Star
Yeah,
Trek
yeah.
is play and work at the same time, all the time.
So premiere dates will make your
Premiere
Star
dates
Trek day.
will make me a whole lot happier because I feel so lost without them. But I was interested. We talked about the opening titles for Prodigy earlier in the show, and I was kind of weirded out that they released I was glad to see the opening title for Prodigy, but it was 5 days before Star Trek Day. Like, why not just wait for Star Trek Day?
There's got to be something bigger coming on Star Trek
I
Day, right?
guess.
Maybe they'll. We don't actually know the premiere date of Prodigy yet, do we? Maybe it'll surprise premiere on Star Trek Day.
fall. Oh no, they better not.
They're thinking, how can we make Kevin's life even
Exactly.
more complicated?
You can't layer this stuff, people. We have a show to produce. We're doing good to do one episode per hour episode. Leave us alone. But yeah, it was very strange to me. I thought Star Trek Day would have been a perfect time to premiere.
It was
this.
unusual. I will not deny it.
So I was confused by that. But anyway, we'll see what else happens on Star Trek Day. I do look forward to Isa Briones. That's going to be very cool, and it's always fun to see interviews and stuff like that. So it'll be exciting. So, hooray! Happy Star Trek Day, everybody who's listening on Star Trek Day.
55 years and counting.
Yes, and counting. Boy, I'll tell you what. So, 800 episodes and counting. 10 or 11 series.
10 or
we don't
11
really know.
series and
We'll
counting.
wait till Mike decides. That's good. That's good. It's a joyous time. We're going to talk about probably a less than joyous episode now, which is Season 2, Episode 4 of, I don't know what season or episode we're in. Season 2, Episode 4 of Star Trek Lower Decks, Mugato Gumato. Mike, give
Well,
me your
okay.
thoughts.
Now, yeah. Granted, maybe joyous is not the word to describe. I did like some things about this episode.
There's a lot. There's a lot good in this episode. There's
I
just
think
some
bringing back
things.
the Mugato itself and making fun of the way that nobody in that episode pronounces its name consistently, and
That
they
was
had to
brilliant.
change the name because DeForest Kelley couldn't say what was written in the script, which was
Yeah.
Gumato, and just having the Lower Decks characters just use those words interchangeably, and everybody knows and what you're talking about. It's fine. I thought that was kind of funny.
It's a brilliant retcon, and then you have Shax like using 3 or 4 of them in a row in one scene.
Right,
Every time
right.
he has a line,
just like it's what everybody does. That's how you
yes.
talk about these creatures. I loved Mariner's line about, "Oh, you're creepy." Throwback Last Outpost style Ferengi.
Yes.
I thought that the people,
Have
the
you heard of
Ferengi
Quark?
trafficking in the Mugato were wonderfully, that first season TNG Ferengi, that vibe going on there.
Which is great,
you know,
because I think that shows not just, I mean, we talk about the difference between Last Outpost Ferengi and Quark as kind of, you know, Armin Shimmerman and DS9 writers sort of fixing the Ferengi. But it could also be that there are just different types of Ferengi. Not all Ferengi are the same. You know, rebel against the monoculture.
Exactly. Well, there's that one TNG episode that revolves around the Ferengi scientist coming aboard the Enterprise and doing his experiment and lamenting the fact that nobody at home appreciates him, right?
Yeah,
so,
there you go. Exactly.
Yeah.
So, I did like that a lot. That was a good element.
On the whole, though, I don't know. Of the 4 episodes we've had this season so far, I didn't enjoy this one as much as some of the others. I thought the whole plot about it was okay. Well, I did love the character of Honus, the bartender.
Yes,
on the Cerritos. The Cerritos has answered a Guinan as this kind of Wild West prospector. You know, well, I hear tell that she's a spy, but I didn't quite buy that. Rutherford and Boimler would accept the rumor so easily, and then when we find out it's just a story, she started to keep jerks away from her. You know, I was thinking if this was a 1980s sitcom in front of a live studio audience, everybody would say, "Oh, you know, when we just didn't believe you could be friends with people like us." So you know, it didn't ring true to me the way some of the stuff they do with that friendship normally rings true. Even despite all the comedy, you know, usually there's a heart there, and I didn't feel that. Maybe others felt it, and that's subjective. That's fine. And the B and C plots, I didn't need another C plot around Dr. Tana so soon. Although I have to again say you and David were right, because did you notice Dr. Tana's numerical designation on Tendy's pad was patient 08.019? Which has got to be a shout out to August 19th, which is the birth date of Gene Roddenberry.
Why did I not catch that?
So
very good.
That's gotta be. Yes. There's no other
Has to be.
explanation.
There's no other reason. Yes.
But as a whole, the episode, you know, I enjoyed a lot about it. There were some Easter eggs I really enjoyed, but not my favorite. What about you?
I liked all the stuff we've talked about. I did enjoy the Tahana story. I thought that was fun. I like seeing Tahana. I like learning more about her, and I like seeing her get into her feral cat mode.
Yeah.
I just think it's funny. Like, there goes the doctor.
Now, do you have a cat?
I don't, but I have friends with cats. I have a lot.
You have friends who have cats.
Tim has cats.
I was wondering if maybe cat people appreciated all that stuff more than I do.
I would love to talk to Tim about that, because he is a big time cat person. So yeah, that would be good to know. I have other friends who are cat people too, who are also Star Trek people. So, I liked that. I liked Tendy's, how Tendy dealt with everything. I was of two minds about how the Mugato storyline resolved, because I wasn't sure what the Mugato were doing on this planet and why it was okay to keep them there. I liked the idea of a Mugato preserve, but is it okay? Should it be on this planet? You know, I mean, there are people living on this planet. We see them at the beginning of the episode, at least 2 of them.
Oh, right. The Denobulans, right? Dr. Phlox's
Yes,
people?
exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes. I love that they did the puffy thing. The puffy face thing, because we didn't get to do that very much in Enterprise with Dr. Phlox.
Did he do that some? Did his face puff up like
yes.
that?
Yeah, at least once, maybe a couple times.
I got to go back and rewatch that.
It was a CGI effect, so they didn't get to do it very often.
Oh, okay.
So, but it's cool because we're in animation, so we can just have the Denobulans just go.
Right.
But there are clearly people living on this planet, so it's like, well, what does the government of this planet have to say about this? What do the people of the planet have to say about this? Why do the Ferengi get to,
Well, those are all excellent points. And
charge.
for all that they bring in the Mugatos, the episode it really reminded me of was The Devil in the Dark, because it comes to a resolution where these two species can live together, but if you look at it maybe too closely, one species is really profiting off the other.
Yeah.
And both times you've got Starfleet saying, "Go for it, man!" And granted, it's better than the Mugatos being continually abused and sold off so their horns can be sawed off and whatnot.
Right.
But is it any really? I mean, and just like it's better than the miners killing the Horta, but it's interesting. I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't make too much of it, but that to me was the real parallel. Was like, wow. So Starfleet's just every now and then it's okay if it means peace, one species can profit at the expense of the other, and Starfleet's cool with that.
But of course, the way they put it at the end of the episode, the Ferengi saying, "We work for the Mugato now."
Well, that's
right?
true.
So
which is more than the miners on Jaina 6 ever said about the Horta. So.
Right. So they're cleaning up the poo and all that stuff, and they want to make sure that the Mugato have the best
you are
they
correct,
can have.
Yes.
So,
you are correct.
They're really kind of going for a sense of symbiosis there. It's not a zoo, it's a preserve. They roam free.
Yeah.
So I kind of like that. I like that better than...
Okay, I like it better now.
It can't be a menagerie.
I see.
See what I did there?
I was going to say it, but it's such a cliche. But it's okay, because I was going to say it.
But yeah, but it just is. It's interesting. It's interesting that they went in that direction. The thing that got to me about the episode that I didn't like as well was the level of violence. Like
yes,
like in the opening when in the opening when Mariner is just bashing Boimler and Rutherford, and there's like blood spatter and everything, and I'm thinking, oh, it's her holodeck program from last episode.
Nah.
And then we're at the bar, and Rutherford and Boimler are bandaged up, and I'm like, oh my gosh, she literally did that to them? That's horrible. Because she was talking about having a workout, and I'm like, oh, workout. Right. So it's holodeck, so that's why she's beating the life out of them. But no, it's just she's just doing that, and I thought that's kind of awful. And then there's a lot of like the Mugato kill a couple of Ferengi, and then the weird hunter dude that they randomly run into who gets one scene and then gets his head bitten off.
Oh yes,
like, what the heck? And then there's all the species propagation,
the Mugato romance, Mugato mating. Yes,
I mean, the third, and like I'm like, dude, this is like why I can't show this series to my son, because it's like it's beyond. We don't even see that stuff in Discovery. I mean, this is like
that's true.
To me, that was pushing the line. And that's the problem that I had with the premiere episode and why I didn't like it, Second Contact, because it was this zombie story, and it was just it wasn't funny, and it was all gore and zombie stuff and whatever, and it was just dumb. And it wasn't smart at all. It was just stupid. And so I really hated it. That's why with the next episode, when it got clever and self-referential and fun, I enjoyed it a lot more, and I've been in love with Lower Decks ever since. But this episode got back to more of that, where it's like, this is a bit much. This is a bit too raunchy, a bit too violent. Like, we need to. Well, I mean, of course, the season's done. You can't advise anybody, but we need to dial it back, and I hope they do. So,
I agree with that.
Yeah,
I'll leave us with a positive thought. If we're done with this episode, that is, then maybe we're not. Maybe you've got more to say, which is fine too. But I did like that. Boimler and Rutherford's diplomat game kind of teaches them how to save the day, reminding us all that compromise is nobody has to be all the way happy with everything, but we move forward. I thought that's something that our society could stand to remember more these days.
Absolutely.
So I thought that at least that was a nice pure shot of Star Trek ethos there.
I love that, and I love that. In a lot of ways and for a lot of reasons. Of course, it was great that they walk in with a thing that looks like the tube cannon that Kirk made in Arena, and then it's a projector.
Yes.
It's marvelous.
24th century PowerPoint presentation.
Right. I mean, there's no reason they necessarily had to do that, but it's funny that they did.
Yeah.
But and I liked that, and I liked that idea of kind of saying, well, we both kind of aren't completely happy with this. Yay, we got to compromise.
Right.
And I think compromising is something that, coming from the Christian background that I come from, the evangelical Christian background, compromise is very much denigrated. You don't compromise because compromise is associated with sinning or violating your faith or that sort of compromise. That kind of compromise.
Moral compromising.
Right. And so there's this very much sort of there's also this that comes with that, and it's not always intentional, is a sort of dominion mentality that you won't budge an inch on anything, and everything becomes very combative. And that's true in a lot of religious groups, not just Christian groups and not just of the kind I come from, but it was true for that. And I think that is something that is a skill a lot of people need in our culture broadly. But I think from a Christian perspective, we can really understand that that's part of peacemaking. If we say we love peace and we want to have peace with our neighbors and we want to love others, love is sacrifice. And love is giving. Yeah. And you lose something a lot of times when you love. As much as you gain, you also you give of yourself. It takes something out of you, and that's okay. You need to not constantly be fighting for your own interests. You need to fight also for the interests of others, to give in to others, to give other people space, so that you're not always dominating the conversation. I thought that was cool.
All right.
So there we go. I'm hoping for better next week, but it wasn't all bad. In fact, you reminded me of some really good stuff in the episode, so I feel better about the episode now that I didn't.
There's always fun stuff. I just really the second and third episode this season especially really got me thinking. Okay, it's really going to be hitting on all thrusters every week.
Yeah, I know.
But not even none of the live action series do that either. So
exactly. They're going to be
shouldn't hold this to an impossible standard.
Exactly. So awesome. Well, Mugato Gumato.
Let's not call the whole thing off.
Let's not call the whole thing off. Let's not. Let's keep it going. So it's Star Trek Day. And we've talked about some of our hopes for what Star Trek Day will entail. 55 years ago today, as this episode drops. Tomorrow as we're recording it. And I know. The Man Trap first aired. And we'd talked about just sort of looking at the Man Trap. I always thought the Man Trap was a weird way to open the series. A really odd opening, and you've written a defense of the Man Trap as the opening for Star Trek, and it
was never intended, of course, to be the first episode.
Exactly, it wasn't. Right.
It wasn't the first produced. It wasn't intended to be the first shown. Leonard Nimoy says the network chose it because they thought it was "quote unquote" proper science fiction with a proper monster threatening folks, And I remember watching him in a TV special talking about it. He said, and the critics didn't like us, and rightfully so. And that got me thinking, well, now, hold on a second. I mean, I know you're Leonard Nimoy. You've got some weight to put behind that opinion. But, you look at the Man Trap, and although it's not the best Star Trek episode, I wouldn't argue that. It's not a bad one either. It's got some problems. I think its biggest problem is, has the Federation run out of salt? And you can't just give this thing some salt. Right. The only time they talk about giving it salt is to draw it out so they can kill it. Right. And I get that it's killed some Enterprise crewmen, but again, to bring up the devil in the dark, so did the Horta, and they found a way to keep the Horta alive.
Agreed.
And everybody could be happy. So despite all that, it's got fabulous performances by recurring cast and guest cast. It's got more for Sulu and Uhura and Yeoman Rand to do than they do in most any episodes. The first season they had some really good stuff to do. And it's got a really bona fide sci-fi premise, the one that Star Trek will return to many times, the species, the member of the species who's the last of its kind. And what do we do with that? And even though the Enterprise crew is out to kill the thing, there is some thought given to remember the buffalo, remember the bison.
Right.
We do have some maybe responsibilities as conservators of life, but So not a perfect episode, not a great episode, but not a bad one. And I can see why people who watched it back in '66 would have, or some people would have been intrigued enough to tune back in.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. It's the thing about it for me, and of course you mentioned Sulu and Uhura, and I love that stuff in the episode. I love that. We have Uhura recognizing the creature speaking Swahili.
Yeah,
and it's like, wow, like actually talking about cultural heritage and stuff, and not just having people on screen,
absolutely,
which I loved. But at the same time, I felt like tonally, it's the wrong. For me, it was getting off on the wrong foot because it's kind of more of a horror episode. Or
oh, absolutely, it's a horror episode. Yeah,
it's very. It's not that Star Trek can't do horror and can't do scary stuff, but I feel like it's so much in that vein and so much in that genre that we needed to start with something more essential. And, like I was talking last week about, starting my son off with the Corbomite maneuver.
Yeah.
Because that's an essential Star Trek episode. It just kind of tells you what Star Trek's about. Without some of the stuff that's kind of clumsy and awkward and not quite right that's in the cage and Where No Man Has Gone Before and things like that. But I do think those are both better pilots. Both, they're pilots,
they were both
obviously.
Intended to be pilots.
Right. I mean, they're both better premieres.
They're both better episodes too. I think.
Better episodes. Yeah. They are.
No, I mean that. I think they both are.
No,
by far
agree
better
with
than
you.
the Man Trap.
Yeah, I agree with you. And the Man Trap. I mean, it was interesting because I saw an ad online for some TV station somewhere who was celebrating Star Trek's 55th anniversary by showing The Cage.
Yeah.
And having some commentary on it and whatever. And I thought, well, that's cool, but The Cage is 57 years old.
I mean, but it really is. All of Star Trek is there in Genesis, in embryo, in seed form, whatever metaphor you want to use.
Right.
When we decided we were going to talk about the two pilots tonight, I went back and watched them again. Of course, I've seen them umpty-ump times. They both are among my favorite episodes.
Yeah, me too.
And I said, okay, I always tend to get caught up in, oh, this is so different than the way it turned out to be.
Yeah.
The little things like, what's that hat on Captain Pike's TV set in his quarters? And some of the broader things, so like Spock, why is he yelling, the women, all these emotions, right. Smiling at the blue planet that sings, which, come on, who among us wouldn't smile at a blue planet that sings? I give Spock a pass on that. But I thought this time I'm going to watch it with I'm going to try as much as I can to forget about what I know about what's to come in Star Trek and just watch these shows as self-contained stories. What argument are they making? What points are they making? Mm-hmm. And of course, with an eye toward the gospel of Star Trek, what theological things can I see? And so I was watching The Cage, and I get to that scene very early on where Captain Pike's having a vocational crisis. Right. He has this long, beautiful scene with Dr. Boyce about, I'm considering resigning, and Dr. Boyce says, look, there's a galaxy of things to choose from other people, but not for you. This is what you're meant to be doing. And he says, what really struck me this time was he says, you either meet life as it happens to you, take it head on and lick it, or you turn your back on it and wither away and die.
Yeah.
And Pike repeats that line, a variation on that line later in a scene with Vina it's cut from the menagerie, and it's so I'd never seen it before I saw The Cage in full. But it got me thinking, this story, The Cage, is not just about Pike's vocational crisis. It's about what is humanity's vocation. Are we going to go out and engage the unknown? And the line that clinched it for me was Vina's line. She says of the Telosians, when dreams become more important than reality, you give up travel, building, creating. And I thought, okay, those verbs are what Star Trek is arguing, or what this show is arguing. The Cage is arguing that's humanity's vocation: travel, build, create.
Yeah.
She says the Telosians just sit, living and reliving other lives. And I tried not to think too hard about the fact this was the umpty-umpth time I've sat and relived the cage. But you know, they have atrophied, and they're only able to do these things vicariously through the specimens in their menagerie. You know, whereas Pike, as representative of humanity, is at a pivotal point. He could turn his back and so atrophy just the way the Telosians have, or he could continue, and humanity could continue to travel, build, and create. So I thought, you know, as a meditation on the vocation of humanity, I think the cage still has a lot to say, and it still feels fresh and exciting to me, even 57 years later.
Well, I think you're bang on correct with that. There are so many things that come to my mind when you're talking about that. One of them is, this is a theme we return to often in Star Trek, the idea of a stagnant life being no life at all, and that particularly I talked about it in the book when I talked about This Side of Paradise. That you know, here we're on this planet where we're healthy and we have everything we need, you know, and we want for nothing, but we also have no challenge. We have no work. We have no adventure. We don't work to better ourselves in any way. We just are existing. And Kirk pushes back very strongly against that, and very rightly. And a similar thing in Return of the Archons and several other episodes. But I like what you're talking about in The Cage, because, that idea of traveling and building and creating, those are very important parts and very important things to Star Trek. And I think I love, you know, as you were talking about, you know, the Telosians just, you know, live vicariously through others. I mean, I was thinking exactly the same thing you were about how much Star Trek we've all watched. But
so that's okay if it then motivates us to go out and do something with our lives.
So that's the thing, is that I feel like there's this sort of low-key way or undercurrent sort of way in which that's almost a commentary on the project of Star Trek itself. That, you know, you can't just sit and watch these adventures. You know, these adventures need to motivate you toward creating your own adventure, the human adventure, which is, as the motion picture tells us, just beginning.
Right.
It's always beginning anew. God's mercies are new every morning. So is our quest for humanity. So do we renew our minds continuously, not just once.
You know, it's interesting. There's been a dust-up of sorts in the Star Trek news this week. Rod Roddenberry decided to weigh in on the Get a Life skit that William Shatner did 35 years ago.
Yeah.
35 years ago now. I remember watching that on TV.
Yes.
35 years ago, SNL, where, you know, the William Shatner persona on stage at the con is telling all the fans, you took this job I did as a lark and turned it into a colossal waste of time.
Yeah, right.
And I think, you know, I like this skit. It's funny, but I think there's you know, it is a temptation.
Yes.
Not just Star Trek, but anything. You can take it and miss the point and turn it into a colossal waste of time. Or you can, as you said, you know, create your own adventure out of it. And, you know, I know for me personally, one way Star Trek has inspired me to do that, you know, my highlight as a Star Trek fan is having my short story published, I don't know, years ago.
Yes, that's
in 1999 in Strange New Worlds 2. Still available as an ebook, makes a great gift.
That's right.
But so, and I thought, okay, this is great. I'm going to enter that contest and I'm going to get my 2 more stories in, and then I'll go on and write science fiction, you know. So I entered that contest every year, but I kept submitting a different version of the same story every year. And Dean Wesley Smith tried to tell us all on the AOL boards, look, if I turn down one of your stories, don't just rewrite it and send it back. You know, write a new story. But I really had this idea I just wasn't going to let go of. And so then the contest ended and I had one story to show for it, right? Which I'm, you know, grateful for and thrilled about. But you know, but the positive side is that got me into freelance writing of nonfiction, of religious education curriculum and some other things. And so I have this whole other kind of side hustle, side career that I might not have had if I hadn't had that confidence of the Star Trek story contest, So that's a minor example in the scheme of things. Other people have been inspired to do far greater things, of course, because of Star Trek. We talked about that when we watched Woman in Motion.
Oh, yeah.
About Nichelle Nichols, how Star Trek really can motivate people to make something bigger, whatever scale that is for you, of your life.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be, the shuttle program.
Right.
It doesn't have to be becoming an astronaut. Thank goodness. But I do think something like that, you can say that's small compared to what somebody else has done or whatever, but what does it mean for you, right?
Yeah.
Is it growing you as a human person? Is it growing you in your faith journey? Is it growing you intellectually? Is it growing you spiritually, emotionally? Does it give you a creative outlet? Those are huge things.
Yeah.
If you can get a lot of benefit off of a small thing that you do with your life, as long as it means something personally to you and is beneficial. There are all kinds of things that can contribute to your growth. Taking a walk for 15 minutes every morning might seem a small thing to do, but the benefits can be great.
Absolutely.
To your mind and your soul and your body. So, it's worth doing, even if it seems small comparatively to other people's things that they do. It's worth doing. But I do feel like, Gene once said that his greatest wish for Star Trek was that it would go off the air because it wouldn't be needed anymore. We talked about this last week.
Right.
And I think it was David. It was either you or David. Well, gee, that narrows it down. But I think it was David who was talking about the hope that the churches would shut down because they were no longer needed, kind of thing. And it's interesting to make that relationship between our experience of a television show and our religion. They're not really that far away from each other. And we can, I think, turn our religion into entertainment that we consume. Turn our religion into something of which we are passively receptive.
Yeah.
And from which we do not derive motivation for active religion. We've talked on the show many times about how, going to church or reading your Bible or studying theology or whatever are good things, as long as you're doing those in beneficial ways and they're helping you. But that's not the whole of what a religious commitment of one's life is. All of life is a sphere for you to live out the calling that God has for you. All of life is a sphere for you to love others and to help the world be a better place and to grow and to share with people. It's not just contained to these things, and these things should not be passive engagements. And so I don't think that Star Trek or religion of any kind needs to go away because we don't need it anymore, except obviously consummation of salvation. But I think we will always need it to focus our thoughts and focus our hearts and focus our minds, however we engage it, whether it's in an institutional church or on your own or with your family or whatever. That kind of focused attention to things that matter is always important and should always motivate us toward a life that lives out these great ideas that we think about. I think it could be really easy to sit around even writing books on theology and then not living a life that puts any of that theology to work.
Absolutely. Yep.
So so I think that's very central to the Cage, that idea of a life lived versus a life not lived,
It's one reason they find the illusion the Telosians create of the survivors of the Columbia crash compelling.
Yes.
Dr. Boyce says it was a perfect illusion. They had us seeing just what we wanted to see, human beings who'd survived with dignity and bravery. In other words, even though they were in this terrible situation, they'd crashed and, had been scrounging for 18 years, they had done it, and they had done it well, and so I think that's another moment that had never quite struck me that way, that, the imperfections in that illusion were what made it so compelling, because the humans were rising above those imperfections and still, still fulfilling their vocation even in adverse circumstances.
Right. And that in itself is a Star Trek narrative.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Of looking at humans accomplishing something that gives us hope for what we can do in our own lives, and that's a true thing. But it was an illusion that told them. The description I've heard of fiction that many people have said over the years, at least at its best, is that good fiction is a lie that tells the truth.
I like that.
It's a story that didn't actually happen.
Right.
But it needs to say something that's true.
Well, Jesus knew that, right? His parables aren't historical incidents.
Right.
Even if some of them are true to life stories, but even then, most of his parables, there's something that would not have rung true to the first century audience. No shepherd in his right mind would leave 99 sheep to go after one that's lost. You cut your losses, and you still got 99.
Right.
I mean, so these Jesus fictions were meant to. I've compared them to a grenade thrown into a crowd with the pin drawn out, which is maybe too violent a metaphor. I should come up with something better. But they're meant to blow open our sense of who we are and what the world is and what the world could be, and who we could be and who God is and who God wants us to be. They're not just stories with a point, which is what we tell the kids in Sunday school. And at one level, that's okay because that's what they can handle. But really, they're meant to shake us up, and we come out the other side seeing life and ourselves and God differently. So yeah, I think Jesus might endorse that definition of fiction.
Yeah, I agree.
Of good fiction.
Right.
It's interesting. The only tell in that illusion, Dr. Boy says, was their health's almost too perfect.
Yeah.
And so to bring this into dialogue with Where No Man Has Gone Before, the second pilot, when Dr. Piper is examining Gary in sickbay after he's been zapped by the energies at the edge of the galaxy, he says, "I've never had a patient like you. Gary, your readings are perfect across the board. Even the worst." I forget the exact line. I had it here somewhere, but he says, "Everybody's off on some reading, but Gary's not.
Right.
He's perfect."
Right.
And so this intrigued me because I watched The Cage in the context of when it was first aired on network television for Star Trek's 20th anniversary back in 1986. Gene Roddenberry himself sets it up, and he talks about what we're going to see and how the network didn't like it. So at the end after they show The Cage, Gene Roddenberry comes back on the camera and says, the last thing he says in this special that wrapped around The Cage was, "For us, no limits," meaning for us humans, no limits. But Where No Man Has Gone Before says there really are limits. I mean, yes, it's about exploring and building and traveling and creating, like The Cage said, but Gary Mitchell shows the limits we're not to trespass. If you watch the unaired version of Where No Man Has Gone Before, the pilot version, before it was re-edited to be a regular episode, it starts with a different prologue. There's no Space, the Final Frontier speech. But Kirk is talking about the Enterprise is starting a new phase of its mission. He says, "Until now, our mission has been space law regulation, contact with Earth colonies, and investigation of alien life." He kind of throws that as an aside. But now, a new task, a probe out into where no man has gone before. Earlier in the speech, he says, "What is out there in the black void beyond?" So this is, front and center, this mission of going into the absolute unknown, and seeing what's out there, and presumably encountering it with dignity and bravery and all those things we talked about in The Cage. But Gary shows human progress gone really, really wrong.
Right.
There's this whole argument between Dr. Daner and Kirk about Gary, about whether or not the ESP powers, which apparently in the 1960s were given more scientific credence than they are today. But, she says, an Esper human could be a better human, an advanced human. Right. She says, Earth is really unimportant. Before long, we'll be where it would have taken mankind millions of years of learning to reach. This is after she's developed the powers as well.
Right.
And Kirk says, well, what will Mitchell learn in getting there? Will he know what to do with his power? Will he acquire the wisdom? So it goes back to what you were talking about, the struggle, that we are meant to advance, but we're not meant to advance all that easily.
Right.
We're not meant to advance without the struggle, because the struggle is where the wisdom comes and where the learning comes. And we've talked before about the God line. Above all else, a God needs compassion. But that's where humans get compassion too, is going through the struggle, living the life, coming by it honestly, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's absolutely true. And boy, there's something to be said about the incarnation there too, isn't there?
Absolutely. Right.
That there's a compassion expressed by God in joining in our human experience. But then also, you're absolutely right. I think the cardinal sin in Star Trek, the worst thing you can possibly do is play God.
Yeah.
And there's a lot, and even going back, we mentioned The Last Outpost earlier in this episode. Even going back to that episode, there's conversation between Riker and Portal about whether the Ferengi are capable, of whether they have the moral formation to handle technological advancement. So there's definitely this balance in Star Trek between moral growth, cultural growth, and technological growth, or our power that we have. Our power that we have and our ability to use it. And we never want that balance to get out of hand, to get out of sync, because once our technological growth or our power of any other kind, be it the power of the Q or the powers that Gary Mitchell gets from the strange energies.
Strange energies, you got it.
Call back to last week's episode.
Technical term.
Technical term, canon now, strange energies. But whatever that power is, if our obtaining of that power outpaces our moral formation, our character formation, then we will lead to destruction. And I think that happens a lot in human history. That's something we always need cautionary tales about. Because it's interesting, you talked about the line from Roddenberry, "For us, no limits," and boy, I remember that. And you're not wrong in saying that the Where No Man Has Gone Before says that there are limits. A lot of Star Trek says that there are limits, but it's those moral limits. It's those limits of recognizing ourselves as what Gene called a child race or an adolescent species. But he really did believe in that statement, "For us, no limits," because, as we talked about on our Roddenberry episode 2 episodes ago, he said, as clearly as I can, he's asked about whether he believes in God. He says, "As nearly as I can focus on the question today, I believe that I am God. Certainly you are. I believe all of us intelligent beings on this planet are a piece of God, are becoming God." So he really does see a divinity inherent in us and a sort of divine transcendence somewhere on the other end of our continuing evolution, and somewhere with it. So I would agree, but also nuance a little bit to say
that's a fair. No, that's a fair
there
correction.
are limits, but there really are no limits in Roddenberry's worldview. And again, that does comport with the Christian worldview, as we talked about before, of us becoming in communion with God, coming to be in full communion with God,
right?
And therefore
within those
moral
limits. Within those moral limits, there are no limits to what we can do.
Right. Well, and there's no need for moral limits when you don't have a sinful nature. Moral limits don't exist. It's just the way life is. Everything is imbued with the presence and the love and the community of God. We're talking about consummation of creation here. Ultimate best view we can have for humanity, right? Everything is imbued with that, so there is no impurity. And so we can adventure and explore and enjoy the creation as was originally intended. So, but yeah, fair point, about limits and not, but there's another side to it too, I think.
No, I think that's a good nuance to bring to the conversation. And it makes me think about how the Christian theology I'm familiar with, when it talks about the nature of God, God is transcendent and limitless, but not in the sense of God could do anything, right? But God chooses to be God in a certain way
Right.
toward humanity. And as Christians, the Trinity is the most, as difficult a concept as it is,
Right.
it's the most concise symbol and way we have of talking about God as a community that seeks the good of others outside God's own self, even and wouldn't have to. God could be omniscient murder God from the first episode of Lower Decks this season.
Yes, yes.
God could have been Gary Mitchell,
Yes.
and but by saying God is triune, we're saying that even if there were no world and no humanity, God would still be love, and that the nature of love is to reach outside itself. So even this loving communion of Father, Son, Holy Spirit, whatever words for the persons of God you want to use, even that community of love is not content to live and relive its own adventures and make itself a colossal waste of time.
Yes.
It reaches outside itself, creates a world, creates living beings, creates humanity,
Right.
and then enters into relationship with the world, with the natural world, with humanity.
Right on.
And the thing about perfection, again, classical Christian theology, as I understand it, says Jesus is the truest human who ever lived, fully human, fully divine. And that verse in Hebrews says, "Who was tempted in every way we are, yet without sin."
Right.
And some people have said, well, that means he wasn't fully human, right? Well, no, he was more human than you are or I am,
Right.
because sin is not intrinsic to human nature. Sin is foreign to human nature.
Right.
So I was thinking of that as you were talking about this, there being no need for moral limits once you really are in communion with God. Jesus being, his will perfectly aligned with God. No sin by definition.
Yeah. And that's why it's also, I think, really important to be careful about what we call sin and how we use that word.
Yeah.
Because there is all sort, and this is another thing we talked about in the Roddenberry episode, there's all sorts of variance in humanity. And a lot of the variance that is denigrated by various people, and particularly denigrated as sin, usually has more to do with cultural preference and or cultural dominance than it does anything truly biblical or truly antithetical to humanity.
The temptation is there for everyone. It's always something to be on guard against.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that plays in too with the episode, with not just the godlike power sort of getting out from under you, but the ability to choose the kind of God you're going to be. Because the kind, as Gary gets more powerful, he gets more arrogant, he gets more demanding, he gets more denigrating of humanity and of Kirk in particular. And we have this godlike being who is definitely not functioning as a god of any kind of love or compassion. And when we talk about a god needing compassion, we're talking about Star Trek V. And in Star Trek V, again, we've had this conversation recently too. We're talking about what kind of being this god is. And in thinking about what kind of God you're going to be, if you get your godlike powers, and even when Riker is trying to be beneficent, and is trying to help his friends, he's not giving them what they truly need, and he's actually getting arrogant with the way he uses his generosity. But all of those things, none of us are ever going to be suddenly, most likely, imbued with godlike powers, struck with strange energies, or become part of the Q
One
continuum.
would hope not.
Whichever, one would really hope not. But it's interesting to look at these stories because they not only talk about who God should be and who God therefore is, right? As Star Trek V very explicitly does, But also, um, if those are the kinds of principles we see at play when we're talking about what kind of God to be, then those principles are also at play when we're talking about what kind of human to be. And I always go back to Data's words and Data's day, learning, changing, growing, and trying to become more than what I am. There is always that quest for advancement as human beings, but it has to be grounded in those essentials of essentially being more like God, not in a Bruce Almighty way, not in a Gary Mitchell way, of being able to perform these great feats and having great power and being able to call up Kefarian apples.
Right.
but being more like God in character. And we get that example for humanity through Christ. And of course through other people who we can look at as Christ-like figures, Christ-like examples. And we get those in Star Trek and elsewhere. But as we talk about what it means to be a good God, we're also talking macrocosmically, right? We're also talking microcosmically about what it means to be a good human. And I think that's one reason that Star Trek continually returns to this kind of theme. And it's been a theme from the first episode, of the Telosians playing God over the humans, or from Where No Man Has Gone Before, particularly, all the way up to the 799th episode. But the 800th episode, in 800 episodes, we've constantly returned to this idea of the God being, and how we use our power, and what kind of moral development we need to have in order to have authority, or in order to have to gain those things which we're looking for to grow and become better versions of ourselves. So
yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned Star Trek V, honestly, because I don't think I'd ever quite put my finger on it until you said it, but it strikes me that Sybok, though misguided by this vision, really is at heart, I think, a compassionate person.
Yes.
Because I've always been so compelled by Lawrence Luckenbild's performance in that role, and I've never quite been able to put my finger on it, but he's got that sort of Jesus vibe about him, doesn't he? Except for the parts where he's wondering whether, am I mad? Mm-hmm. But if he'd been able to somehow survive that scenario, but of course, he really is extending the same compassion to the God thing on that planet that he's been he knows this creature's in pain, so it is a sacrifice he's making. So anyway, I'm just glad you brought that up, because that movie, well, it has its faults, but there's a lot going for it. I mean, there's some deeper stuff there. And Sybok, I think, he models a compassion that certainly some other Vulcans could learn from, and other humans could learn from.
Absolutely.
And
that's the interesting thing about him. And I would have spent a lot more time on Sybok if I'd had room in the book. I really regret that I couldn't spend more time on certain things, and one of them is Sybok, and the greater scope of Star Trek V. But yes, you're absolutely right. I think that's the core of his character. He's misguided, right, in what he's doing and how he's doing it and where he's going. And but he makes amends for that in a way that a lot of people don't in Star Trek. And he's certainly not a person who becomes a god, but he certainly takes on a sort of a god-like thing, a god-adjacent thing, a messiahship, if you will. But he ends up, sacrificing himself, as you say, out of compassion for God and for the people of the Enterprise, who he's unintentionally misled.
Right.
So I think that kind of purity of soul and intention, and that kind of ability to admit when you're wrong, would be great to see in a lot more religious leaders. I think they could take a lot of notes from Sybok in that regard.
Yeah.
But of course, Sybok isn't a part. But Sybok is a part of this long lineage of God being stories, and of playing God stories, and of themes of both control and manipulation, which is what the out of balance God is all about, and also the themes of stagnation versus growth, which is what that sort of Telosians as television watchers kind of thing that we've talked about. And so 55 years later, I think we continue to find these themes revisitable. We continue to find these things compelling and relatable for us as human beings, because if it's not television, it's, to borrow an original series title, bread and circuses. If it's, we'll always find ways to distract ourselves, to tell ourselves stories, and we can tell those stories. We need distraction. We need rest. We need recreation. We need, for lack of a better term, I don't really like this term, entertainment. We need art. I like to say that art makes life bearable. And one of the ways it does that is that we tell stories to one another and to ourselves that help us grow as human beings, help us deal with the conflicts and the struggles that we meet in our lives. And I think Star Trek has done, if I may say, a stellar job. I'm just full of these this week. But Star Trek.
Well, it's all good. It's all good.
But Star Trek has done an amazing job of carrying that out, carrying this complex theme over 800 episodes, 802 episodes, and 13 films, or 801 episodes and 13 films so far, and many more to come. Has been an amazing task. It's carried out by a lot of different people, and it's an amazing thing to see and be a part of, and to be talking about now as not just a great piece of entertainment, but I think a really beautiful human achievement, and I hope we can use it to help ourselves become better humans along the way.
Hear, hear.
Hear, hear. So yeah, thanks for bringing the analysis this week, Mike.
It was fun. I didn't expect to have. I was thinking, I've seen these so many times, and I love them. I love them both. But I even like the Man Trap, as we've said. But yeah, just really try. It's interesting when you try to set aside all you know about Star Trek. Sometimes new things can emerge. Much as when you come to, we've all read lots of the Bible. Well, not we all, but many of us have read lots of the Bible stories a lot of times. But if you can, at least for the moment, come to it with as fresh eyes as you can, something may just surprise you new. So,
well, and even as you were talking about earlier, learning more about the culture and the time in which those things take place tells you more about how parables would have, or the words of Jesus would have landed on the ears of people at that time, and the cultural significance of things that we might gloss over, or that we've given other significance to, as things have been translated through the centuries. So it's always great to learn more about the Bible for what it is. And
I recently heard a speaker say we don't have to protect the Bible from itself. They were talking about the issue of translation specifically, where the translators will soften things that may be a little rough, or it may sound a little scandalous if you're coming at it from later theology and later belief. But their position was, we don't have to protect this text from itself. Let's really engage with what it says and go from there. And if we really take it seriously, that's what we should be doing. So we don't have to protect Star Trek from itself either. I mean, Star Trek's not the Bible, but as I was watching The Cage, I thought again, I wish Captain Pike hadn't made that crack about women on the bridge. That's not Star Trek. That's not Star Trek. But see, isn't that as we as fans can hold Star Trek's feet to the fire when it's not living up to its ideals, and maybe not in the same way, but there's a way when being faithful to Scripture means what things are there that are not. That's not Jesus. That's not God.
Right.
So I hope that's not a blasphemous analogy.
No, not at all. But I think you're right, because it's not just about what's in the Bible, but it's how we've interpreted it,
how we interact,
and sometimes
part of the process.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Well, thanks, Mike. That's cool. I think we're gonna have an actual question from the audience this week.
Let's get to it.
Yes, sir.
So our audience question this week is a question about how we talk on the podcast. The listener asks, in your podcast, you often talk about evangelical. To me, this word is about people telling others about Jesus, the Great Commission from Jesus. He's referring to Jesus telling us to go make disciples of all the nations in Matthew. Listener continues, but I get the feeling that to you and to others, this word has a different meaning. I've read some things about its use, some things not sounding that good. If you don't mind, could you tell me what that word evangelical means when you use it? Or can you direct me to other places to read? And he thanks us for taking the time to answer.
That's awesome. And I love this question because I think it's our first non-Star Trek question. that we've answered, which is great. And I love that they're asking about something that we say on the show, or I say on the show a lot. I don't mind. I try to steer clear of a lot of denominational politics and things like that on the show, but I do not mind referring to myself as post-evangelical, because I think a lot of our listeners fit into that category, where we grew up in some form of American evangelicalism and are moving away from that, or have moved completely away from that. And it can be difficult to rescue your faith when you're on the other side of the tradition that you grew up with. And I think there's a strong movement away from evangelicalism in our time period, not just in a certain generation, but in our time period in general, just because of the a sense that the teachings and the culture are not beneficial. We talk about in Scripture, about bearing good fruit, and there are some, some of us have experienced some very bad fruit. Let's just talk generally first of all. You're right about evangelical being similar to the word evangelistic or evangelism, the Great Commission. That word evangel does mean good news, but evangelical and evangelistic or evangelism are not the same thing. Evangelical that word has its roots in evangelism, and evangelical denominations are very focused on evangelism in various ways. But moving away from evangelicalism does not mean moving away from the evangel, from the good news of Jesus. And in fact, I think I've discovered more good news of Jesus or deepened my understanding of the fullness of good news of Jesus. Not just one gospel about how to go to heaven when you die, but the whole of the gospel about how we live here on earth, and the beauty of the scope of the love of God for all of God's people and all of God's creation. So, not that isn't present in evangelicalism. I have 2 degrees from an evangelical university. I grew up in an evangelical tradition, and there's a lot of benefit from that. I had a friend just the other day say, "Gee, I wish I had this particular element of my worldview that you have. I wish I had made that association and that was ingrained in me." And I said, "Well, that's one of the benefits of evangelical religion." It has its moments, but so some of the denominations that are considered evangelical, and I won't cover all of them because I don't know all of them, but like Baptist or like Vineyard Church or non-denominational churches, Bible churches, a lot of the churches that we think of as just sort of American Christian, the whole subset, right? It's gone. I think when we talk about American evangelicalism, it's so much more than just denominations and their teachings at this point, and churches and their memberships. There's a whole subculture, if you will, of American evangelicalism, and it's what a lot of people think of when they think of American Christianity, as people largely think of it. It comes from those evangelical traditions. And a lot of us who are post-evangelical, maybe there are social causes that we feel like the evangelical church is getting wrong. Maybe there are causes, things related to theology that we feel like they're getting wrong. Something about their culture or the way they interact with the broader culture, the way they understand the gospel, the way they understand the Bible, whatever it is. And then a lot of us who grew up in that tradition have been very hurt by it. I wasn't as much as a lot of people that I know. I had a generally positive experience with the evangelical subculture that I engaged in. I used to work in America's largest Christian bookstore. I mean, the heart of evangelicalism. When people talk about the Bible Belt, they're talking about evangelical Christianity in America. And so that has a lot of good in it. And a lot of people who are kind and caring and compassionate people who love Jesus and want to make the world a better place, who are just doing their best, but who some of us, but there are things that some of us feel are misguided, or that some of us just don't track with or relate with anymore. And it's been very hard to for a lot of us to rescue our faith from that process. So that's why I go ahead and talk about being post-evangelical on the show, because I want people who have been in that space to recognize that I relate to them, that we relate to them, and that we want to help them figure that journey out, because, faith is worth rescuing, and it can be really hard to even feel that way. And you see a lot of rise of what they call the nuns, people who don't embrace a particular religion. A lot of those people have come out of evangelical churches, but a lot of them have come out of Catholic churches and mainline Protestant churches. When we talk about mainline Protestant churches, we're talking like Presbyterian.
Hi,
Presbyterian. Presbyterian, Methodist, Episcopal, Disciples of Christ, Christian Church, all those denominations.
Well, just to interject a little bit, Kevin. So what you're saying, when you say you're post-evangelical, you're not saying you've gotten over wanting to share the good news.
Right.
You just, it's the way you do it and the approach that you use to do it. Because I think, as you mentioned, as a good Presbyterian, I don't identify myself as evangelical, but other good Presbyterians do. Because that word, as you said, comes out of evangel, the good news. And I think a lot of people in mainline churches would identify themselves as evangelical. In fact, one of the largest, if not the largest, Lutheran denominations in this country, its official name is the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. Most people would consider them a mainline denomination, but they still believe there's enough value in that word to communicate their mission is to go out and make disciples of all the nations. Right. I think, again, as one who would not identify myself as evangelical because of the cultural baggage, I think that word's accrued in America. There's still a lot of value to some people in that word evangelical, and they want to hold on to it because it connotes to them freely and lovingly and generously sharing the good news. And I think, as you've said in your response, that is something certainly to be valued and to be commended.
Right. We're on a podcast whose lead word is gospel. So clearly we have an affinity for the good news of Jesus around here. But at the same time, when I and most others in my experience use the word evangelical, because I live in a very strongly evangelical area, in terms of like this particular subculture, right?
Subculture is just the word for it, right? Like you hear pollsters talk about how X% of evangelicals voted for this, or exactly. Y% of evangelicals think this. They're talking about a subculture more than an attitude of faith, perhaps.
Right, and it's not even necessarily a particular religious association, and that's people who self-identify with the word evangelical too. So that can get a little tricky and messy in terms of figuring out exactly who we're talking about. But you get the idea. And so that's what a lot of us have moved out of, and that has been a particular struggle for us in sort of rescuing our faith on the other side of that. But as I said, a lot of people have had similar experiences in other traditions and in other religions and whatever, and it's not an uncommon thing, but there's just sort of a particular moment of it in our current epoch. There's just a lot of it happening. And so it's something that I've always felt a particular need to address on the show, and to tell people that there is life on the other side of of whatever church you've found yourself falling out of relationship with, and that God is bigger than a church, God is bigger than a denomination, God is bigger than a subculture, and you can trust in that, and faith is still worth having, even if a lot of the people around you, or the majority, or all the people around you who represent that faith, or try to represent that faith, are doing things and saying things and believing in things that you're not resonating with at all, and that are even you're finding harmful. So that's not an uncommon thing in human history, but we're in a particular epoch of it right now, and in my particular situation, I happen to be post-evangelical. Not that I've completely rejected everything from my evangelical background at all. There are a lot of ideas and doctrines and understandings of my place in the world, and understandings of God and the scriptures that I retained from that. Like I said, it was mostly a beneficial experience. But there are a lot of Christians, a lot of believers in Jesus who don't even like to use the word Christian at this point in our time. I often point to the example of Anne Rice, who spent 28 years a de facto, well, not quite an atheist, but definitely having left her Catholic roots, and then came back and wrote novels about Jesus and has fully embraced faith in Christ. But then, as she engaged with the Christian world, eventually said, "You know what, guys? I can't do this. I'm not going to call myself a Christian because of what the word Christian now means in my culture." In
the baggage again. That it accrues,
the baggage, the cultural baggage, and I definitely relate to that. I have trouble when I go out and say that I'm, that we're a Christian podcast or something like that, or I write from a Christian worldview perspective. I can have trouble making myself heard and understood for who I truly am, because even that word can get problematic for people. So it's just an interesting time to be alive, because we're reinventing a lot of things about our culture, and religion is one of them, and that makes sense. So be not afraid. But that's the difference. That's what we mean when we're talking about evangelical. Okay, so thank you very much for that audience question. I hope that clarified that for you. And please, if you ever have curiosities and things you want to ask us, please ask. We love answering them on the show. So, Mike, what have we got coming up next week?
Next week, we have all sorts of Star Trek goodness that we just don't know about yet, because the things are... Always in motion is the future. Wasn't that Star Trek? I don't remember. But we are for sure going to be talking about Season 2, Episode 5, An Embarrassment of Dupplers from Lower Decks.
Yes. And and whatever else comes up, which, we don't I don't think we have any major anniversaries next week. We've had 3 in a row. We'll see how it goes. But I hope you'll join us for that. And in the meantime, please like, share, rate, comment, and subscribe wherever you can do that. And also send us your questions, Gospel According to Star Trek, on Twitter and Facebook or Instagram, or gospeltrekpodcast@gmail.com. We would love to discuss your question on the show. And also, you can support us either by going to anchor.fm/GATST and clicking on the support button, or by going to our Patreon, patreon.com/gospeltrekpodcast. That will help us greatly, and you'll get to hear all kinds of outtakes and cool bits that we have for you as we have them as regularly as we can. So that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. We thank you so much for being here, and until next time,
I'm Mike Bote.
And I'm Kevin Sinise, and as Jesus said in John 10:10, live long and prosper. See you next time.